My name is Alex Turner, and I still can't believe what happened to me that night. I keep replaying it in my mind, over and over again, wondering if there was something I missed, or if maybe I was just exhausted. But no matter how many times I go over it, it doesn't make sense. It shouldn't have happened, but it did. It was a Wednesday night, late October, close enough to Halloween for things to feel eerie, but not so close that it explained what went down. I'd stayed late at work trying to meet a deadline, and by the time I finally left the office, the streets of downtown Milwaukee were pretty much empty. I didn't think much of it. I just wanted to catch the train and get home. I remember stepping into the station, Milwaukee Intermodal Station for those who know it. It's usually bustling with commuters, people rushing to catch a train to Chicago or Minneapolis. But that night, it was dead. I looked around, maybe expecting to see the usual security guard by the ticket counters, or a stray traveler lost in their phone, but there was no one. The place was too quiet for 10 p.m., even on a weekday. I felt a chill, but I brushed it off. It was October in Wisconsin. Cold weather comes with the territory. I bought my ticket, and after what felt like forever, the train finally pulled in. The train itself seemed off, not broken or anything, just older than usual, like one of those cars that should have been retired years ago, but somehow stayed in rotation. I boarded, glancing around at the near-empty car. The fluorescent lights inside flickered just a bit, giving the whole train this sickly yellow glow. There were only a handful of people inside, a woman in her 50s sitting near the front, a guy in a stained Cubs jacket snoring loudly in his seat, and two college-aged kids a few rows ahead of me, whispering to each other. No one looked like they'd be trouble, but no one looked particularly friendly either, just a group of tired commuters trying to get home like me. I sat down near the back, put in my earbuds, and tried to relax. I remember thinking how cold it was in the car. I figured they just hadn't cranked the heat up yet. It's always freezing in those things early in the season. But still, it didn't sit right with me. I zipped up my jacket and tried to focus on the music. Then, about 5 minutes into the ride, something strange happened. The train jerked hard. It wasn't a normal stop-and-go motion like when they switched tracks. It felt like we'd hit something, like the whole car had jumped. I took out one of my earbuds, looking around, but no one else seemed to react. The woman up front kept staring out the window, the guy in the Cubs jacket didn't even stir, and the two kids didn't break their conversation. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe we'd just gone over a rough patch of track. Trains are old, things happen. But then the train started to slow down and I looked out the window, confused. We were nowhere near a station, and I didn't recognize anything outside. Just industrial buildings, chain-link fences, and empty lots. No lights, no signs of life. The train came to a full stop. No announcement from the conductor. Nothing. I sat there for a minute, thinking someone would explain what was happening, but nothing. Just silence, except for the faint hum of the train's engine and the occasional flicker of the overhead lights. I glanced around again, starting to feel uneasy. No one else was moving. The two kids were still whispering. The woman at the front didn't budge, and the guy in the Cubs jacket was out cold. After a few minutes, I decided to get up. I mean, who wouldn't? I thought about heading to the next car, maybe asking one of the conductors what was going on. I figured if the train was stuck, someone would at least tell us, right? I stood up, but just as I did, the woman at the front turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto mine. Something about her face made my skin crawl. It wasn't that she looked dangerous or anything, it's just that, well, her eyes were wide, unblinking, and she didn't move, not her arms, not her body, just her head and her eyes staring right at me. I froze, feeling a lump rise in my throat. The train jerked again, even harder this time, throwing me back into my seat. The lights flickered out for a moment, and when they came back on, I noticed the two kids had gone quiet. I looked over at them, and their heads were down like they were trying to sleep. Or maybe they were pretending. Either way, I wasn't the only one feeling the tension. Another 10 minutes passed. No announcement, no conductor walking by, nothing. It was like we were abandoned on this track in the middle of nowhere. I glanced at my phone, hoping I'd get some signal, but of course there was nothing. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was probably just a technical issue. But the longer we sat there, the more the unease started to build. I was just about to stand up again when I heard the sound. It was faint at first, like a low hiss coming from the front of the train. Then it grew louder, a scraping, dragging noise. My heart was racing. It sounded like something, or someone, was moving through the next car, coming toward us. I gripped the armrest of my seat, my palms sweating. The sound got louder, closer, until I could hear it just on the other side of the door that separated the cars. I could see the handle move slightly, as if someone was about to come through. The door slid open, and for a moment, nothing happened. The scraping sound stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. Then, slowly, a figure stepped through. It was the conductor, but something was wrong with him. His uniform was disheveled, stained with what looked like dirt or rust. His face was pale, paler than anyone I've ever seen, and his eyes were glassy, distant. He walked with a limp, dragging one foot behind him, his body moving in stiff, unnatural jerks. He didn't speak. He didn't even acknowledge the rest of us. He just stood there for a moment, staring down the aisle with that vacant expression, his breath coming out in short, raspy gasps. I wanted to say something, ask him what was going on, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth went dry, and all I could do was sit there, staring back at him. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the back of the car, disappearing into the next one. The door slid shut behind him with a heavy thud. I sat there, heart pounding in my chest, trying to process what I'd just seen. The other passengers still hadn't moved. The woman at the front was back to staring out the window, the guy in the Cubs jacket hadn't budged, and the kids were still slumped in their seats. After what felt like an eternity, the train finally lurched forward again. Slowly at first, then picking up speed, we started moving down the track. When we finally pulled into my stop, I didn't wait for the train to come to a complete halt. As soon as the doors opened, I grabbed my bag and bolted. I ran through the station, not stopping until I was outside, gasping for air. To this day, I have no idea what happened on that train. I never reported it, never told anyone, not really. But every time I think about it, I get that same chill down my spine, and I can't help but wonder if I'll ever see that conductor again. I haven't taken the train since. Story 2 credited to Ryan Peterson. I don't usually get home late, but that Thursday night, work had me stuck at the office. By the time I finally clocked out, it was close to 10 p.m. I'm not one to complain, but when you've been staring at a computer screen for 12 hours straight, the last thing you want is a late commute. Still, I was just relieved the trains were still running. It was quiet when I got to the station. You know that kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the last person awake in the world? The city wasn't dead, but it sure felt like it. Just a few people hanging around the platform, an older guy leaning against a post, a girl with her earbuds in, and this woman in her business suit scrolling through her phone. Everyone keeping to themselves, the usual. When the train pulled in, I hopped on, found an empty seat near the middle, and tried to get comfortable. It wasn't crowded, which was nice, but there was still a handful of us, scattered across the car. I remember this one guy, probably in his 30s, wearing a hoodie, sitting diagonally across from me. Nothing stood out about him at first, but, well, I'll get to that later. The train started rolling, and I just closed my eyes, ready to zone out for the next half hour. I was tired, really tired, and all I wanted was to get home, maybe crack open a beer and crash on the couch. But after a few minutes, something weird caught my attention. We weren't stopping at the usual stations. At first I figured it was just my exhaustion messing with me. I pulled out my phone, but the time matched up. We should have stopped by now. I looked around the car. Everyone seemed normal. The guy in the suit was typing away on his laptop. The girl with the earbuds hadn't moved an inch. It was just me and the guy in the hoodie who seemed to notice anything off. He caught my eye, and without a word, he gestured toward the window. "You see that?" he finally asked, his voice low but clear. I looked outside, nothing but darkness. No city lights, no familiar landmarks, just blackness. I didn't know what to make of it. "Yeah, that's weird." The guy shifted in his seat, looking anxious. "This isn't right," he muttered, more to himself than to me. I could feel my heart pick up a little, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was some construction detour. Maybe the conductor forgot to announce something. It happens, right? But then the train kept going and going. We didn't stop once. After a while, that nervous pit in my stomach turned into full-on dread. "Think we should say something?" I asked. "I already tried," the guy said. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "I knocked on the conductor's door. Nobody answered." That didn't make sense. "What do you mean, nobody answered?" "I mean, nothing. No response." I glanced toward the front of the train. The door to the conductor's cabin was closed, but the train was still moving. The other passengers were still completely zoned out. It was almost like they didn't even realize we weren't stopping, like they didn't care. "We should find the emergency intercom," I suggested, trying to stay calm. The guy nodded. "It's at the front, near the conductor's door." We both stood up, walking toward the front of the car. My palms were sweaty and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. As we approached the intercom, I pressed the button. "Hello? Something's wrong here. We haven't stopped at any stations. Is everything okay?" No answer. I pressed it again, harder this time. "Hello, is anyone there?" Still nothing. The guy in the hoodie rubbed the back of his neck, looking around nervously. "This is messed up, man." I didn't know what to say. We were moving, sure, but to where? The whole thing felt off, like we weren't supposed to be here. Then, after what felt like forever, the train started to slow down. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Finally, a stop. But when we pulled into the station, my stomach dropped. It was an abandoned platform. No lights, no signs, no people. Just an empty, cracked platform with weeds growing through the cement. The train doors opened with a hiss, but no one moved. The passengers stayed glued to their screens, oblivious. The guy next to me muttered, "I don't like this." I didn't either. "Do we get off?" He shook his head. "No way, not here." I didn't need convincing. Everything about that place felt wrong. I didn't know why, but I had this gut feeling that if I stepped off that train, something bad would happen. The kind of bad that you can't take back. We stood there just staring at the open doors, waiting for something. Anything. After what felt like an eternity, the doors slid shut and the train started moving again. The guy and I went back to our seats, but we didn't speak. We didn't need to. Whatever was going on, we both felt it. The train sped up, faster than before. The lights inside flickered and the air felt heavy, stifling. I tried to steady my breathing, but my mind was racing. Where the hell were we going? I pulled out my phone to check the time again, but there was no signal, no Wi-Fi, nothing. It was like we'd left the grid completely. The guy in the hoodie was fidgeting in his seat now, tapping his foot nervously. I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. This wasn't just some delay. Something was seriously wrong. Then, out of nowhere, the train started to slow down again. My pulse quickened. Another stop, another empty platform. But this time, when we pulled in, there was someone on the platform, just standing there, barely visible in the shadows. I squinted, trying to make out the figure. They weren't moving, just standing there, facing the train. "You see that?" I whispered. The guy next to me nodded, his eyes wide. "What the hell is that?" The train doors opened again, but neither of us moved. No one did. It was like the entire train was frozen in time. The figure on the platform didn't move either. They just stood there, staring. My instincts screamed at me to stay put, and luckily I listened. The doors slid shut again and the train continued moving faster and faster. The lights flickered more, casting long shadows across the car. The guy next to me was pale, his eyes darting around. "We need to get off this train, now." "I don't think there's anywhere to go," I said, my voice barely audible. We didn't stop again. Not until my usual station, finally. When the doors opened, I practically ran off the train, not looking back. The guy in the hoodie didn't follow me. I don't know if he got off at all. I just knew I had to get out of there. I haven't taken that train since. I don't care if it takes me twice as long. I'm driving to work now. I don't know what happened that night, and I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that empty platform, and that figure just standing there waiting, and I wonder, what would have happened if I'd gotten off the train? Story 3 credited to Jason Parker. You know, I used to love trains. They were my sanctuary after a long day, a place where I could plug in my headphones and just shut the world out. But not anymore. Not after what happened last Thursday night. I work in downtown Chicago. Typical office job, nothing special, just pushing paper and dealing with emails all day. That night I stayed late because my boss dropped a last-minute project on my desk. I wasn't thrilled, but I needed the overtime. So there I was, leaving the office around 10:45 p.m., dead tired, heading to the subway station on Staten Lake. It was one of those nights where the city felt emptier than usual. The streets were practically deserted, the neon signs glowing faintly in the misty air. I don't know why, but something felt off the second I stepped into the station. It was quiet. Too quiet. I mean, it's never packed that late, but there were usually at least a few people hanging around waiting for the last train. But that night, the platform was practically deserted, except for a guy sitting a little ways down. He had a hood pulled over his head and I couldn't see his face. He wasn't looking at his phone, wasn't reading a paper, just sitting there staring straight ahead. I shook it off. I figured he was just some guy waiting for the train, same as me. The red line rolled in with that familiar screech, and I got on. The doors closed behind me with a hiss, and we were off. I found an empty seat near the middle of the car and sat down. There were maybe 5 other people scattered throughout. 2 teenagers chatting quietly near the back, a woman with grocery bags on the opposite side, and a couple of tired-looking guys in business attire, probably coming from the office like me. I put my headphones in, closed my eyes, and let the rhythmic sound of the train on the tracks calm me down. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, we were still moving. I checked my phone. We should have stopped at least 2 or 3 stations by then, but we hadn't slowed down once. I pulled out one earbud and looked around. Nobody seemed bothered. The teenagers were still chatting and the woman with the groceries was scrolling through her phone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I got up and walked toward the front of the car to see if I could spot a map. Just to double-check the stops. But when I reached the door connecting to the next car, I froze. The next car was empty. Not just empty, but dark. No lights, no passengers. Just a pitch-black void beyond the window. That's when the intercom crackled to life. This train is now out of service. All passengers must disembark at the next station. Out of service. I'd been riding the Red Line for years, and I'd never heard an announcement like that before. The train didn't even slow down. It just kept speeding through the tunnels. No sign of a station in sight. I went back to my seat, trying not to panic. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe they were doing track work, rerouting the train, something like that. But as we sped through the tunnels with no stops, no passengers boarding or leaving, that creeping feeling of unease only got worse. Then, the train jolted, hard. Like I nearly fell out of my seat kind of jolt. The lights flickered overhead, and for a second I thought we were going to crash. The teenagers stopped talking, and the woman with the groceries stood up, clutching her bags like she was about to bolt. The train slowed down. Finally, we were pulling into a station. But when the doors opened, I knew something was wrong. The platform was empty. Not like late-night empty, more like abandoned. The kind of place that looked like it hadn't seen a human footstep in years. Dust coated the floor, the tiles were cracked, and the overhead lights were dim and flickering. Nobody moved. I glanced around at the other passengers, hoping someone would take charge, but everyone was frozen, just staring at the open doors. "Is this even a stop?" one of the business guys asked, breaking the silence. His voice was shaky, and I could tell he was just as freaked out as I was. "I've never seen this station before," the woman with the groceries whispered, looking around nervously. She was right. This wasn't a station on the Red Line, or any line I'd ever been on. No signs, no maps, just emptiness. The doors stayed open. We all sat there, waiting for them to close, waiting for the train to start moving again. But it didn't. The minutes stretched on, and still, nothing. Then, the guy sitting closest to the doors, one of the teenagers, stood up. "Screw this, I'm getting off," he muttered, grabbing his backpack. His friend tried to stop him, but he was already stepping onto the platform. The second his feet hit the ground, the doors slammed shut behind him. I jumped, and so did everyone else. The train jerked forward, and we sped off, leaving him standing there in that creepy, abandoned station. "What the hell?" the woman shouted, running to the window. But it was too late. He was gone. Just gone. The train kept moving faster now, as if it were trying to make up for lost time. But I couldn't shake the image of that kid left behind in that dark, empty station. The lights flickered again, and when they came back on, something felt different. The air felt heavier, thicker, like it was hard to breathe. I looked around at the other passengers. They all looked as freaked out as I felt. We didn't stop again, not for a long time. We just kept speeding through the tunnels, the darkness outside the windows pressing in on us. My hands were clammy and my heart was pounding in my chest. I wanted to say something, to ask someone what the hell was going on, but I couldn't get the words out. Finally, after what felt like hours, the train started to slow down. We were pulling into another station, but this one looked normal. Well, as normal as it could after everything that just happened. The doors opened and I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my bag and ran off the train, not looking back. As I made my way up the stairs and out of the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, like the train hadn't really let me go. I haven't taken the subway since. I can't. Every time I think about stepping onto that train, I feel sick to my stomach. I keep thinking about that kid we left behind. I don't know what happened to him, and I don't want to know.